Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. It's getting closer and closer to Christmas. It's definitely winter, at least where I live. So I decided to put on that wintry, jingly music in the background. You get one plus point if you can actually tell what song it is and or what game it's from. I'll give you a hint. It is one of the best Zelda games in my opinion. So yeah, this episode is gonna be very artsy, and I know that's probably not a surprise by now because I am an artist, so if I made an episode about programming, I don't think it would be very good because I don't really have anything of value to say on that. But yeah, so this episode is a lot about getting that sort of painterly, Ghibli-like look in your environment, especially in Unity, because I think a lot of those handy-dandy things are just sort of built into Unreal, so sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to get the look you exactly want in Unity, because it feels like you just keep on bumping into thing after thing. But yeah, so I'm going to be talking about that today, and also probably a little bit of lore, because I've been writing up a storm. That's a little bit of a winter joke. Not really, but I'm trying. I spent all of my creative energies on this game and this episode, so I don't really have the best puns or commentary today. But yeah, I think we should just get back into it and right where we left off in the last episode. So, see you on the other side. So, to get back where we left off, essentially this part of the video is going to be me continuing where I left off, but also talking a little bit more on how I got that more painterly look in the scene and such. So basically, to start things off, I noticed that if you look at the ground terrain texture, I noticed that if you sort of go a little bit crazy with the painting and use many different colors of a variety, it gives it more depth, and it almost makes it look like you're using some kind of tessellation on the terrain, because if you have the darker areas and the midtones and the highlights, it just makes it look more painterly. I know I'm gonna overuse that word in this video, but there's no other way for me to put it. It looks a lot more free and colorful, and it just looks like there's more depth, essentially. So basically, after sorting out and painting with the textures just going a lot more crazy to get more depth and nuance in the scene, I decided to look at grass, because I already have my perfect dream grass that I want to use, but I felt like I should probably use two versions of the same grass, but one be shorter and the other be taller, just to give it some more like natural feel in the scene. Because if you have like just one type of grass and they're all the same height, it doesn't look very nice because everything just looks flat. But now with the repainted ground and the like sort of mixing high and low grass in the scene, you get like this sort of height difference, which makes it look a lot better. And essentially, after sorting that out, I made some more flowers, which I know sounds like such a... It sounds like it's such a repeated line by this point, but stay with me. It was very important and very crucial, and it looks very good in the end result. Because I was looking at these reference images and these pictures from like Ghibli movies and these like anime paintings, and I noticed that usually there'll be like these clusters of flowers sort of spread across fields. And I think what I had before, there were too many like different varieties and it didn't really blend and it all looked kind of weird and there was just too much. But now by limiting it to like 3 flowers that are just sort of like clusters spread out, I think it looks a lot better. And then I got to working on something that I've been wanting to do for so long, and it just felt so good to have it be done with. I finally set up a shader that blends the terrain and the mesh. I know it's like essentially built in Unreal, but for some reason it just isn't in Unity. And I was struggling so bad to figure out how to do it, but I finally did, and now it just blends the texture of the terrain and meshes, and it just feels so good because now suddenly it looks 1,000 more times anime-like. I also redid the textures on the rocks and the statues, but I didn't record that because I've already I feel like I'm almost backtracking at this point, but like bear with me, it looks so much better now and I'm loving it. And then I imported my cloud thingy because I'd set up like a little shader that rolls like clouds over the scene. So I just like re-added that to the scene, and what I was left with was something that I was so happy with and so glad that I just sorted this out, because now everything looks like 1,000,000,000 times better and 1,000,000,000,000 more times like the way I want it to. Alrighty, so let's talk about Sky Island. I feel like I'm probably pretty soon gonna give it like an actual name. This is more of like a code name or like a temporary name, but for now we're just gonna call it Sky Island. In my secret notes, I'm even referring to it as like quotation mark Skyloft because I don't know, I remember loving the way that little island felt when the first time I played through Skyward Sword. So yeah, but yeah, whatever. I'm gonna fix a name sometime soon that is hopefully good. But for now, let's talk about this quotation mark Sky Island. So after loving the way my sort of the aesthetic was looking of my environment, I sat down and I started to think, okay, how do I make this environment feel more dynamic? And essentially I decided to make the island be a sky island, because the way it was currently in the project is that it was a huge square, because terrains are squares. It was just like a huge massive square, and I wanted the world to feel alive and intentional, but not like limited, because if it's like an open world and the world is a square, well, at some point you are gonna run into the edge of the world, and in that case you would need to put up colliders to prevent the player from going there, but that just sort of feels, I don't know, I just didn't like the way that felt. So I was like, okay, but what if I reshape the shape of my terrain to be in the shape of an island and make it be a floating island, because that way it's like, well, as a player you can see that, oh, this is where the ground ends and I am in the sky, so it doesn't feel as limiting to be told, no, you can't literally jump off into the void, rather than just be like, oh, the terrain just stops here. There's like a harsh line. So this way instead, it makes it feel not as, let's just call it like a creative way of limiting the player, because then suddenly, if it's a floating island, I can just make the island be small but detailed, meaning that I can put a lot of more like effort into making sure that this quotation mark open world, even though it's like a smaller one, that it has like a lot of love put into every like nook and cranny. So basically that's the next thing I did. I decided to sort of sculpt out and shape these two larger but actually pretty small islands next to each other that are going to be like floating in the sky, to, as I said before, limit the player, but not really limit the player, but also sort of limit myself, because if you think about like what is an open world, it's kind of like daunting to sort of dive into. So I don't know, it felt a lot more comforting for me as the developer and the designer to be like, okay, well, this is an island, so I can clearly see where this starts and where it ends. So after I like blocked out the shape of the island, I started painting on the textures and sort of like going crazy again like I was before, because now I already knew exactly how to go about making the grass look great, and I had the new flowers and everything was, it was running really, really smoothly. And it was also sort of fun to block out this sort of island and think, oh, how does this make sense progression-wise? So I actually ended up setting up a document where I've actually detailed the exact progression of the game on the island, but I'll show that later instead, because I started working on structures. So on this Sky Island, obviously there needs to be some people living there. So I thought for the next segment, I'm going to talk a bit about the lore that I ended up writing while I just show the footage of me working on the structures and mapping out and all of that, so we can sort of do this a little bit more speedily. So let's talk about the lore of Sky Island. So essentially, I decided to have a sheep theme for the game. I think you'll understand exactly what I mean when I go into the lore and when I start talking gameplay and game progression. So do like a quick summary, essentially, of what I want the game to be about. The main character, I mean, obviously I don't have a name for this yet, so yeah, I know that's kind of awkward, but whatever. The main character is a shepherd, a sheep guardian, or whatever you want to call it. And one day she notices that one of her sheep is missing, so she sets out on this little adventure on the island to try and find the missing sheep. And I know that sounds kind of silly, and that is obviously very oversimplified, but I thought I'd delve a little bit deeper into the lore of the world, or the mythology for Sky Island. So essentially what I ended up writing was that in the beginning of time, when humans were very young, relatively new to this world, in which wherever they live, there was so much evil and there was so much darkness. Essentially, it was like a buffet for these evil forces to basically do whatever they wanted to do with the humans, because they were too weak, too young. And in this world where there was no light and there was no respite, two gods or deities, or whatever you want to call them, took pity on these humans who were essentially living out their lives in misery with famine and war and evil, and then they would die. And because the world was so young, there was no afterlife yet. So essentially these humans, they would just spend their life suffering, and then when they died, they would just go nowhere, be absorbed back into this evil cluster that was rampant over the world. So essentially these two gods, like I mentioned, they took pity on these humans, and they decided to take action to hopefully maybe one day give the humans a better life. So essentially, the older of the siblings, or the twins, decided to step up and become the sun,
the full concentrated power of the sun,
so that there would be warmth and light and fire in the world. And in doing so, they created the afterlife, so that the humans that died, they would have somewhere to go to finally rest after living such difficult lives. And when doing this, the younger of the siblings, they also took action, and essentially they tore their flesh to give bodies to these fallen souls to inhabit, and then they tore their wool so that there would be clouds in the sky, essentially giving shelter and cover to these humans from the always watching evil forces. And because of this, now that there is essentially a afterlife because of these brave and kind spirits, these guardians came into play, and that is what the shepherds are in the game, because the sheep that they herd are actually vessels for the souls so that they can make a journey into the afterlife. So these children on the Sky Island, they spend their lives tending to the sheep or souls or whatever you want to call them until they are content and relaxed, and then after that they make a big migration up into the sun or the afterlife so that they may find rest and peace and love, and hopefully when they find the strength one day they will even be reincarnated. And so the reason why I mentioned that sheep are kind of important to the story of the game is because both of these gods and deities, I decided to depict them as sheep. So the older one, who became the sun in the afterlife, is this beautiful big sheep with these horns that essentially hold up the sun of the world that radiate warmth and heat. And the younger of the siblings is this ram with plenty of wool and big horns, because, like I said previously, their wool was what ended up becoming the clouds in the sky, and the many millions of pieces of their flesh is what essentially gave birth to the sheep, so that the souls would have a place to stay. And so it's basically building on that I'm developing this sort of world and this sort of Sky Island. So in my head, I'm imagining that you're running around on the island, and there are plenty of sheep, because when the game takes place, people are getting ready for this big migration where they walk all of the sheep into the light, into the afterlife. And that is why it's so important for our main character to find this little lost sheep that has run off, just to ensure that they get a chance at the afterlife. So yeah, the player will basically be running around, solving some simple tasks, looking for their sheep, and interacting with the other children who are getting ready for this big journey. And then towards the end, the player will realize that this lost sheep has accidentally found their way into an old temple that is radiating with these ancient dark forces that used to be very rampant across the world and is very hostile. So the player has to defeat some slimes, maybe a boss, who knows. But and then at the end they're finally reunited with their sheep, and they can head back home and get ready for the big migration. So yeah, that is essentially the lore that I wrote. I definitely did a better job writing it than I did explaining it, so I'm probably gonna have to reiterate this, but essentially that's it in broad strokes. So sheep, very important. They're a part of the lore, the origin. Sheep deities are the reason why the sun and the clouds and these children that shepherd these sheep exist, and it's important because they need to guard these sheep to make sure that they get an afterlife. And then obviously there's going to be sheep in the game, and I'm going to have a lot of fun putting in like sheep signs and stuff like that. So I just thought I'd give like an explanation on why there's suddenly like such a heavy focus of sheep in the game. I promise it makes sense. So yeah, I just felt like I should probably get that out of the way, because suddenly the world doesn't feel as hollow anymore if you know that there's like sort of like a little explanation for why the things are the way they are. So yeah, I just figured I should get that out of the way so that you know why I'm talking so much about sheep. But yeah, that's basically it for the lore. So I think at that I'm gonna wrap it up for now. I've been working on some other things, like animations and stuff, but I don't want the video to get too long, so you'll just have to stay tuned. Hopefully in the next video I can talk more about animations. Hopefully there will be maybe even sheep around and I can get started on the next part of Sky Island, and I can also show you some of my ideas regarding the pacing and stuff on the island, because I have it all mapped out. So yeah, I can talk a bit more about that then. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I'll be seeing you around. Bye bye.